Okay, so the main topic of this lecture is sentinel values. So the processing the sentinel value. So if you look at our course website, you can please download chapter for loop part number 2. So this is a sentinel value, and the definition of sentinel value is, when you don't know how many items are in the list, use a special character or the value to signal the last item. The special character is typically, or the value, right? It's like for one of the examples is exclamations or question mark, and the special value could be typically is -1, right? Or the negative values. The sentinel value denotes the end of the data set, but it is not the part of the data. So the good example could be, let's say you write a program for the instructors teaching classes, right? And then your program will ask you, your program will ask instructors to enter midterm score or the score, of your students. Of his or her students, and then ask user to put a negative value to terminate the program, right? So if I just draw the flow chart, your program will just say first, let's say at the very beginning the score is a 0. The score is, so ask the user to enter the score, right? So ask a user to enter score, right? Or the negative value. Or sometimes you can use like a -1, right? To what? To terminate the program, right? And then in the Boolean expression that used in the while loop, right? We'll check, right? Is this score? So if your program asks for the negative values, right, and then your score is greater than 0, which is, the score is typically is greater than 0, right? 98, 100, 88, 77. So if this score is greater than 0, that means yes, which is true, right? And then using that particular score, do some actions, right? So to process the score, like for example, like adding the scores to compute the total, and then compute the average and etc. Whatever. So the process this process the data, so process the scores, do some take some actions, right, based on this score. So then the example is like the total, calculating the total, whatever. So do some process, and then just go back to here, right? And then we're gonna ask again, hey, please enter the score for your next students, etc. So this is a loop. So I'm gonna use a while loop for this. And then if the score is negative, right? If score is not greater than 0, which is false, right? Then it's going to terminate your program. So terminate your program, right? So this is a terminate your program. And then so let's just write this. Let's just implement this flow chart using Python shell, using a Python program. So file, new file, right? And then what I'm going to do is, let's see, first input, right? So that's a score is equal to input, and then the score is input. Let's see, like, you know, enter score or negative integer, you know, to terminate this program. Okay, so that's the input, and then since I'm assuming that the midterm score is just integer value, okay, so I'll just you have to convert string into integer, right? Then I'm going to use a while loop. So basically I'm going to write this part, this part, while the score is greater than 0, right? Then do something, right? And then go back to this input statement. And then while score is greater than 0. Since there is a possibility that somebody, you know, some students, you know, get 0 points. So I'll just 0 is right equal to 0, right, which is very rare. But then let's say here it's, let's say if the score is greater than 0, then I'll just you know, take some actions, like, you know, like for example, compute the total and like average, whatever. Right? But let's say I'm going to skip this part because I want to really put emphasis on the sentinel values. So let's say you just, you know, add a few lines here, but I'm going to skip this part, and then we'll say print the score was entered. Score, right? And then, okay, so if you so if I just, so basically we need another statement inside a while loop, because let's say the score was entered, then you have to have this input statement, because if you look at this flow chart, right, this is like a part of your while loop, right? So you need to have this statement to ask users to enter like another value, like another score. So compute the total, but I gotta skip this. So let's say score, copy, and then at the end I'm going to add this, right? So this is going to repeat until the user enters a -1. So if the user enters negative value, right, this expression becomes false, and then that's when this loop terminates, right? And then let's see, right? And then say print and user enters a negative value, and then the end. The program is is about to terminate, right? So in this case, your terminal value is what? Set of negative values, right? Okay. So let's just test. Let's see. So now let's just so this is what, let's say this is sentinel, right? Sentinel example 1. So enter score, the negative integer to terminate this program. So let's say the first students get 100, right? And then as you can see, it'll just print 100 here, 100. And then it's going to ask one more, okay, please enter, like, you know, score for another score, or you put a negative integer to terminate this program. So I'm going to enter the midterm score for my second students, and then let's say, you know, let's say the students got 80, right? Another student, right? He or she got 80, and then here's 80, right? And then 77 for the next student. And then just keep doing this, right? And then now I want to terminate, because let's say I enter all the scores for my students. So now I'm going to terminate this program, and then the way I should terminate this program is what? I have to enter the negative integer. So let's say -5 or the -1, right? Either way. So obviously it's -5 is a negative integer. So now so the moment when I enter -5, this becomes what? This becomes false. So it's get out of this while loop, and then it's print this one. The user enters a negative value, the program is about to terminate, right? User enters negative value and the program is about to terminate, right? So, and then my program just terminates. Okay, so this is the just example, like I show you one example of how to use a sentinel value. Okay, so I want you to take a look at this example code, right? And then yes, so I'm going to end my lecture here.